Chapter 124. Although I took a small step, but there is still a distance from peak fourth heavenly layer, Su Qin slowly walked out of the right spring square. His thoughts fluctuated as he thought silently. At this moment he deeply felt the difficulty of martial Dao cultivation. Even he, who constantly takes various divine pills and spirit medicines, progressed so slowly, let alone the other venerable Arhat and legends. If there is no particularly great opportunity, I'm afraid that they will spend their whole life at the first and second heavenly layers, or at most the third heavenly layer. Although there is a distance from peak fourth heavenly layer, according to my current cultivation speed, I can almost reach it in at most 10 years. Su Qin estimated in his heart. Reaching peak fourth heavenly layer in 10 years is based on the premise that Su Qin does not sign in a treasure of a higher level than blood bodhi and innate spirit liquid in the next 10 years. If he signs in a higher level of divine pills and spirit medicines, the 10 years here will be greatly shortened. It's a pity, whether it is innate spirit liquid or blood bodhi, they are all treasures of the Arhat level. Those below Arhat can't take them at all. Su Qin shook his head slightly. Even if it is a grade 1 great grandmaster, if they rashly take innate spirit liquid or blood bodhi, they will only end up exploding and dying. Because the energy in innate spirit liquid and blood bodhi is too huge, far beyond the limit that a grade 9 martial Dao can bear. Time passed slowly. Su Qin returned to his normal life again, signing in every day, cultivating, and occasionally chatting with the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng for a while. As for the family Su, whether it is Su Shimin, Su Sungho, Su Qingyu, or Su Qin secretly used Arhat's true essence to change their muscles and cleanse their marrow. In the martial Dao of this world, having sufficient resources was not enough to create a supreme expert. Apart from resources, comprehension ability and temperament were also indispensable. The reason why the dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters in the Emperor of Tang's palace have such achievements is not only because of the support of the resources of the Emperor of Tang's palace, but also because of their own good perception and good temperament. Among the people of the family Su Shimin's vitality began to decline. Coupled with the loss of his drive, even if Su Qin provided more cultivation resources, it would be difficult for him to enter the upper realm. As for Su Sungho and Su Qingyu, they did not have the heart for martial arts. Similarly, their achievements in martial arts were limited and could not be made up for by cultivation resources. After realizing this, Su Qin did not have much hope for the people of the family Su in the martial Dao, and directly used his true essence to change their muscles and cleanse their marrow. Anyway, even a grade 1 great grandmaster can live for less than 200 years at most. After Su Qin's muscle tendon changing and marrow cleansing, the people of the family Su can live for more than 100 years. The gap is not very big. On this day, Su Qin had just finished his cultivation when the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and Su Yueyun came to the right spring square with joy. Ha! Su Qin glanced at Su Yueyun, and a smile appeared on his face. Third brother, Yunyang is pregnant. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng's tone was so excited that he almost danced with joy. I see. Su Qin nodded slightly. At first glance when he saw Su Yueyun, he felt another weak life aura in her body. If it weren't for third brother, Yunyang and I are afraid. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at Su Qin with gratitude. As early as when Su Yueyun first entered the imperial palace, the imperial doctors in the palace found that yin qi had entered her body, making it difficult for her to give birth to a dragon child. If it weren't for a prescription written by Su Qin that removed the yin qi in Su Yueyun's body, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, would have to adopt a child from another imperial family. Although the adopted child is also the blood of the imperial family, after all, it is not his own flesh and blood. There is a difference between being close and distant. Soon, after a few more words, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, took Su Yueyun back and prepared to let the imperial doctors brew some tonic soup. In response, Su Qin just smiled. Although Su Yueyun was now in her 30s, if it was an ordinary woman getting pregnant at this age, it would be very dangerous. However, Su Yueyun was a martial artist, and her qi and blood were stronger than ordinary people. Moreover, Su Qin had secretly helped her change her muscles and cleanse her marrow, so it was impossible for anything to go wrong. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, 10 months had passed. On this day, there were palace maids and eunuchs coming in and out of Cunning Palace. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was anxiously waiting. "Your Majesty." "Her Majesty will be fine." Eunuch Lu could not help but whisper. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, heard this and did not say anything, only shaking his head. Although the imperial doctors said that Su Yueyun's body was very good and that she had enough qi and blood, there would be no problem giving birth to a dragon child. However, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was still worried. "How is it? How much longer?" The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at a palace maid who had just come out and asked. This little palace maid was obviously shocked. She did not expect the Emperor of Tang to ask her personally. She stammered, "Your Majesty, don't worry, Ma. Her Majesty is doing very well inside." "Very well?" The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm going to be a father soon?" The Emperor of Tang clenched his fists, full of joy. And at this moment, Su Qin walked out of the right spring square and looked in the direction of Cunning Palace. "Little sister." Su Qin took a step and disappeared. When Su Qin appeared again, he was already standing outside Cunning Palace. "Your Majesty." Eunuch Lu was about to comfort Li Sheng again when he inadvertently glanced at Su Qin, who was standing quietly not far away. "This is..." Cold sweat quickly emerged on Eunuch Lu's forehead. Because before Su Qin appeared, he didn't notice anything at all. As a Grade 1 Great Grandmaster, Eunuch Lu always maintains his perception of the outside world, and no movement can be hidden from him. But just now, from the moment Su Qin appeared until now, Eunuch Lu did not notice anything strange at all. It was as if Su Qin stood there from beginning to end and did not move, like a ghost. What's going on? Eunuch Lu was uneasy, and he almost thought that there was a problem with his cultivation. What's wrong with you? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, noticed the change in Eunuch Lu and was about to say a few words when he saw Su Qin not far away. Third brother. You're here too. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, walked in front of Su Qin and immediately said, "Just now, the palace maid said that it was going well inside. It should be soon." "I know." Su Qin nodded. At this moment, a palace maid rushed out and said loudly, "Your Majesty, the Empress gave birth to a boy and a girl, a pair of twins. Is Yuner okay?" The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, immediately walked into the Cunning Palace. Su Qin also followed in. Inside the Cunning Palace, Su Yueyun was lying on the bed with a pale face. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was accompanying Su Yueyun at this moment. Third brother. Su Yueyun saw Su Qin, squeezed out a smile and was about to speak. "Don't move." Su Qin shook his head slightly, stopped Su Yueyun, and walked to the bed. In the next moment, Su Qin flicked his finger, and a trace of Arhat's true essence merged into Su Yueyun's body, slowly nourishing it. Chapter 125. With the influx of true essence into her body, Su Yueyun only felt sleepy and fell asleep in a short while. Yun Yang has suffered. After the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng accompanied Su Yueyun for a while, they focused their attention on the twins next to them. Su Qin also glanced at them. "Huh." Su Qin was surprised. These two children were just born and their skin was wrinkled, but when Su Qin glanced at them, he found that the boy was normal, but the girl had a sense of transparency. Martial Dao genius? Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Generally speaking, when normal people are born, their meridians are blocked, and the martial Dao cultivation is to slowly open up these blocked meridians. Of course, there are also some people in the world who are born with transparency. If such people embark on the martial Dao, they will advance by leaps and bounds. At least there will be no problem in entering the upper realm. Su Qin didn't expect that Su Yueyun's child would be such a martial Dao genius. However, although Su Qin was surprised, he didn't feel surprised. At Su Qin's level, he has long surpassed the concept of genius. Even a Buddhist heart like Xianxia is nothing in Su Qin's eyes. For martial artists, having superior qualifications will only make them spend less time on the road of martial Dao cultivation, but whether they can reach the end or even complete the transformation, it is useless to rely on qualifications alone. Su Qin stayed for a while, and after confirming that Su Yueyun was fine, he prepared to return to the right spring square. As for the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng, they were looking at the twins with joy. Su Qin walked out of the cunning palace slowly and stopped when he passed by the white jade square. It just so happens that I haven't signed in today. Su Qin glanced at the white jade square and said in his heart, "System, sign in." Divine ability? Su Qin's spirit suddenly shook. After signing in for more than 30 years, Su Qin had obtained countless secret manuals, elixirs, natural treasures, and so on. However, there was only one divine ability. It was the Eye of Truth that he obtained from signing in at the Thousand Buddhas Hall. To obtain a divine ability every 30 years, one could see how rare divine abilities were. But now, in front of the white jade square, Su Qin once again obtained a divine ability. I didn't expect it to be a divine ability. Su Qin's eyes lit up as his thoughts fluctuated. Rebirth of flesh? The introduction of this ability flashed through Su Qin's mind. Flesh and blood rebirth, as the name suggested, was a divine ability related to the physical body. Even if his physical body was shattered, as long as his vital parts were not injured, he could use this ability to quickly recover. What did this mean? Almost half an immortal body. Although venerable Arhat and martial arts legends could regenerate broken limbs, the so-called regenerating of broken limbs was a huge consumption even for venerable Arhat and martial arts legends. And it required a lot of time to recuperate, from a few months to a few years or even 10 years. And in the end, it even consumed venerable Arhat's origin. But flesh and blood rebirth was different. Not only was the recovery of the physical body far superior to venerable Arhat's regenerating of broken limbs, but its speed was also much faster. With this divine ability and his terrifying physical body, Su Qin's combat strength would at least skyrocket by a level. Haha. With this divine ability, I have one more trump card. Su Qin was extremely satisfied. Flesh and blood rebirth could not only be used to kill enemies, but also to cultivate. Before obtaining the flesh and blood divine ability, Su Qin cultivated carefully, afraid that he would damage his physical body and plant hidden dangers. But now, with flesh and blood rebirth, even if his physical body was damaged, wouldn't it be solved by using the divine ability to recover once? It's said that above the flesh and blood rebirth, there's another great divine ability, blood rebirth. Su Qin's expression was filled with emotion, and he was fascinated. If flesh and blood rebirth still had vital parts and could only be considered half an immortal body, then blood rebirth was almost immortal. As long as there was a drop of blood left, he could quickly recover. It was comparable to gods, demons, immortals, and Buddhas. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. In these 3 years, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, had completely stabilized his position on the throne. Through continuously issuing government orders and displaying his strength, he had vaguely brought the Empire of Tang to prosperity. Third brother. On this day, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was still standing outside the right spring square. He waved at Su Qin. Next to the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, stood a boy and a girl. They were about 3 or 4 years old. Their big eyes were clear, and they were very cute. This boy and girl were the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and Su Yueyun's children. Now that 3 years had passed, they had grown up a lot. The boy was called Li Yuan, and the girl was called Li Wan. Su Qin walked out slowly. Third uncle, Li Yuan and Li Wan called out in unison. Their big eyes were filled with curiosity. Third brother, Yuan, our angered grand tutor again today. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at Li Yuan and said helplessly, "Father." Li Yuan obviously knew that he was wrong. He lowered his head and didn't dare to say anything. It's normal for children to be naughty, Su Qin didn't care and said casually. Sigh, of course it's normal for children to be naughty. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, sighed and patted Li Yuan's head, but Yuan can't do that. He's my only son, and he's destined to sit on my throne. Any negligence will cause the people to suffer. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, shook his head slightly. He still valued Li Yuan, and didn't want Li Yuan to make any big mistakes in the future. There will be people to make mistakes in the future. We just need to live well in the present. Su Qin looked at Li Yuan and said lightly, "That's true." The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, thought that it made sense. He wasn't a god. How could he predict what would happen in the future? Third brother, why don't you be Yuan Er's grand tutor? With your guidance, Yuan Er will definitely be much better. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly thought of something and said with interest. He had long realized that the fearless Li Yuan was afraid of Su Qin. As long as Su Qin was present, Li Yuan didn't dare to do anything overboard. He was as obedient as he could be. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, felt that nothing was too strange. Forget it. I'm used to being free and undisciplined. Su Qin rejected without even thinking. He came to the palace to sign in and cultivate, not to teach children how to behave. Besides, Su Qin was... Chapter 126. So I'm already an uncle. Su Qin looked at the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng's backs as they left and couldn't help but laugh. Unknowingly, he had already been in the Emperor of Tang's palace for 5 or 6 years. In these 5 or 6 years, Su Qin had watched the Emperor of Tang and Li Sheng change from an uneasy new emperor to a wise ruler who could dictate the imperial court. Bang. In addition, in the past few years, Su Qin has obtained countless heavenly materials, earthly treasures, and spirit pills. What a pity. I'm still a little bit away from reaching the peak of the 4th heaven. Su Qin sighed softly as his thoughts fluctuated. No rush. I still have a lot of time, so I can take it slow. Su Qin wasn't anxious at all. Instead, he became calmer and calmer. For Su Qin, he only needed to sign in step by step and he would continue to become stronger. What was there to worry about? Not only was the palace safe, but no one would disturb him. For Su Qin, it was already a holy land for cultivation. In the past few years, I've used most of my sign-in opportunities at the crop altar. I've obtained thousands of blood bodhi and thousands of drops of innate spirit liquid, as well as various other treasures and spirit medicines. According to my current consumption, these are enough for me to use for at least 5 years. Can I place my sign-in opportunities elsewhere? For example, the White Jade Square? Let's see if I can get another divine ability. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated, and he suddenly had a plan in his heart. At the crop altar, there was a 60% chance of getting innate spirit liquid, 30% chance of getting blood bodhi, and 10% chance of getting other things. Moreover, the amount of innate spirit liquid or blood bodhi obtained each time was different. For example, Su Qin once received 20 drops of innate spirit liquid, and sometimes he only received 1 drop. As for blood bodhi, it was similar, but Su Qin received 12 blood bodhi at most. At the same time, in the longevity hall, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at the information in his hand with a gloomy expression. I can tolerate it if the vassals don't obey the Emperor's orders, but what do they mean by secretly adding fuel to the fire and stopping my orders? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, said word by word. Your Majesty, please calm down. Your Majesty, please calm down. Many officials knelt on the ground and said loudly, Calm down? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, shook his head slightly and said with a cold expression, If I continue to calm down, this position will be directly given to the kings. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, suddenly stood up and paced back and forth. The vassals of the Empire of Tang had their own troops and were overbearing in their own territories. Li Sheng had long wanted to take action against them. Tell me, how confident are we if we remove the vassals? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, glanced at the officials and said, Remove the vassals? All the officials were shocked. Removing the vassals was not a joke. The 10 vassals of the Empire of Tang were united. Once Li Sheng touched one of them, it would affect the whole group. At that time, the 10 vassals would rebel together, and the Empire of Tang would be caught in the flames of war. Your Majesty, please be careful about removing the vassals, some officials begged bitterly. The Emperor of Tang, Didn't he know the hidden dangers of the vassals? But why didn't they remove the vassals? It was because they were worried about the consequences of removing the vassals. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, looked at the reactions of the officials and sighed softly in his heart. In fact, he could understand the thoughts of the officials. If the vassals were not removed, the vassals would still stay in their own territories. But once the vassals were removed, the vassals would be forced into a corner. Who could predict what would happen to them? You can all leave. I want to rest for a while. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, waved his hand, lowered his eyes, and sat back on the dragon throne. Since he ascended the throne several years ago, various government decrees have been implemented continuously, which has greatly improved the Empire of Tang. But the more the hidden dangers of the vassals were revealed. If the Empire of Tang wanted to go further and achieve a true prosperity, it must first solve the problem of the vassals. As long as the vassals existed, the Empire of Tang would be firmly imprisoned in place. As you wish. The officials looked at each other and left the immortal palace one after another. After all the officials left, the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, returned to the right spring square with a pot of wine. Third brother, I'm here again. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, carried a pot of wine and found Su Qin. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, usually did not drink because he felt that wine would affect his thoughts. But today, because of the vassals, he was really depressed and wanted to drink to relieve his worries. Third brother, do you think I'm wrong to remove the vassals? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, whispered. If he and the 10 vassals compromised, the Empire of Tang could be at peace for a while, but what about after that? The 10 vassals were always a threat to the Empire of Tang. In the future, when the 10 vassals were fully developed and took the initiative to rebel, it would probably be the end of the Empire of Tang. In that case, why not take the initiative to the Empire of Tang? Instead, wait for the vassals to rebel? Removing the vassals is naturally not a problem. Su Qin saw at a glance what the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was worried about. He said casually, but you need to be prepared for the consequences after removing the vassals. In short, can the Empire of Tang bear the backlash of the 10 vassals? Su Qin's tone was simple, but he directly pointed out the biggest problem of the Empire of Tang. Did they have enough confidence to remove the vassals? Since the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, ascended the throne, the Empire of Tang gradually began to prosper. But to prosper and to prosper were two different things. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, thought for a while and asked, Third brother, do you think that the Empire of Tang is not capable of removing the vassals? You're too anxious. Su Qin shook his head slightly. He had lived in the palace for a long time. Although he was usually too lazy to take care of things, from Su Qin's point of view, the Empire of Tang still needed at least 10 years to accumulate enough foundation before it was qualified to propose removing the vassals. I'm too anxious. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was thoughtful, and his forehead gradually overflowed with cold sweat. Thank you, third brother, for teaching me. The Emperor of Tang bowed deeply to Su Qin and quickly understood that he had neglected one point. He was too anxious. Governing a big country was like cooking a small fish. It needed to be done step by step. If he wanted to achieve it in one step, not only would it not be a good thing, but it might also be a disaster. It's okay. Su Qin replied casually. He just gave the Emperor of Tang a few words. As for what to do, it still depended on the Emperor of Tang's grasp of the situation. By the way, third brother. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, seemed to have thought of something and immediately said, Yesterday, I went to the National Treasury and found something strange. I still can't figure it out. I invited many people to take a look, but they don't understand it very well. Third brother, you're knowledgeable. You can take a look, the Emperor of Tang said as he put down his wine glass and took out a wooden box from his arms. This wooden box was extremely exquisite. There were faint dark golden patterns on it. It was extremely extraordinary. Su Qin did not care much at first, but the moment he saw the wooden box, his expression froze slightly. His eyes instantly focused on the dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box. Chapter 127. This is heaven and earth array? The moment Su Qin's eyes fell on the dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box, various thoughts flashed through his mind. The wooden box in the hands of the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, was relatively ordinary. It was carved out of 100-year-old sandalwood. To ordinary people, it might be worth thousands of gold pieces, but compared to the mysterious dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box, it was nothing. In Su Qin's eyes, the dark golden patterns on the surface of the wooden box were like a black hole, constantly concealing all the fluctuations around it. Unless Su Qin saw it with his own eyes, even if his divine sense scanned thousands of times, he would not be able to discover the wooden box at all. To be able to inscribe a heaven and earth array on a mere wooden box, this person's strength is probably far beyond that of Tu Erahan from 900 years ago. Su Qin's thoughts raced as he thought silently. Before Teherahan passed away, he had set up a heaven and earth array in his secret chamber to avoid being scanned by others' divine sense. But the heaven and earth array that Tu Erahan left behind was based on the stone door outside the secret chamber. The stone door was a few meters wide, enough to set up a heaven and earth array. But this wooden box was only the size of a palm. To inscribe a heaven and earth array on it was extremely difficult. It was not something that a first heaven arhat could do. At least a third heaven, Su Qin guessed in his mind and became more and more curious about this wooden box. Su Qin wanted to know what kind of treasure was worth a third heaven arhat expert's effort to protect it with a heaven and earth array so that it would not be discovered by outsiders. Third brother, are you interested in this? The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, saw Su Qin's expression and asked casually. A little. Su Qin nodded slightly and said, ever since Su Qin had transmigrated to the present, he had only met two existences at the level of Arhat. One was Teherahan, and the other was the Devil Buddha. Now that he had encountered a third person, how could Su Qin remain indifferent? Since third brother is interested, I'll give it to third brother. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, casually handed the wooden box to Su Qin. By the way, third brother, I heard from the old man guarding the national treasury that this wooden box seems to be related to the great ancestor, but I can't say exactly what it is. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, couldn't help but remind him. Great ancestor? Su Qin narrowed his eyes. When he saw this wooden box, he guessed that it might have been left behind by the great ancestor, the founder of the Empire of Tang, because in the 500 years of the Empire of Tang, only the great ancestor had entered the martial arts legend realm and had the ability to set up the heaven and earth formation. The Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, said a few more words and left. Su Qin sat cross-legged and looked at the wooden box in front of him quietly. The wooden box had no gaps, as if it was a hole, but when Su Qin gently touched it with his right hand, it suddenly opened. Buzz! An inexplicable wave spread in all directions. If it weren't for the heaven and earth formation in the right spring square, this wave would have spread to the entire palace by now. What a strong divine will! Su Qin frowned slightly and looked at the crystal-clear jade pendant in the wooden box. This jade pendant was transparent, and there was a faint mist rising, but Su Qin felt a lot of divine will waves from the jade pendant. Interesting. Su Qin also released his divine will and approached the jade pendant. Boom! Just when Su Qin's divine will came into contact with the jade pendant, he felt as if he had come to another world. This world was extremely illusory, but in the center, there was a huge figure wearing a dragon robe and standing upright. Why don't you kneel when you see me? The figure in the dragon robe slowly raised his head and looked at Su Qin. In an instant, the entire illusory world suddenly boiled, and endless power gathered and suppressed Su Qin. You dare to attack me with a mere incomplete divine will? In the face of such a shocking scene, Su Qin's expression did not change at all, because he knew that everything in front of him was just an illusion created by the divine will in the pendant. Perhaps a martial artist who had just entered the martial arts legend realm would be shocked. But for Su Qin, a venerable arhat who was close to level 4 perfected, it was just a reflection of the moon in the water. It would break with a touch. The next moment, Su Qin slowly took a step forward. Suddenly, crack! The entire illusory world seemed to be under some kind of unimaginable pressure, and it began to shatter and dissipate. In a moment, it completely collapsed. In the right spring square. Su Qin slowly opened his eyes and looked at the jade pendant in the wooden box with interest. Why did the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang leave such a huge divine will behind? Su Qin touched his chin, and his eyes were thoughtful. The divine will in the pendant was so huge that Su Qin wondered if the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang had left most of his divine will here. Unfortunately, through the divine will in the pendant, I have confirmed that the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang should have completely fallen. Su Qin fell into deep thought. If the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang was still alive, the divine will in the pendant would definitely not be as stiff as it was just now. Thinking of this, Su Qin shook his head slightly. More than 500 years ago, the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang established the Empire of Tang and crossed the sea. Since then, there had been no news of the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang for 500 years. If the great ancestor is not dead, this divine will is useless to me. But he has completely fallen, and the divine will in the pendant has become an ownerless object. I can completely refine and absorb it. Su Qin's heart was burning. According to Su Qin's estimation, if he could completely refine the huge divine will in the pendant, he could at least improve his divine will by 5% to 10%. With Su Qin's current strength, it was extremely difficult to improve even a little, let alone 5% to 10%. Moreover, compared to the growth of the body and true essence, it was much more difficult to improve the divine will. The great ancestor of the Empire of Tang left such a huge divine will behind. I'm afraid he left a backup plan. If he fell overseas, could he achieve rebirth through this divine will? Su Qin guessed in his heart. This was the only explanation he could think of. For ordinary people, the death of the body is true death. Even grade 1 great perfection is no exception. But in the eyes of many legends and venerable arhat, the death of the body does not mean complete death. For example, the Devil Buddha from 900 years ago abandoned his body and lived for nearly 1,000 years as a demonic will. The great ancestor of the Empire of Tang probably had the same idea as the Devil Buddha, leaving such a huge divine will behind as a backup plan after his fall. Unfortunately, even so, the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang still fell, and the divine will he left in the pendant was not activated. Su Qin sighed, and he became more vigilant about the depths of the endless ocean. The great ancestor of the Empire of Tang was a third heavenly layer legend. Even he fell in the depths of the endless ocean, and he did not even have time to activate his backup plan. It can be imagined how terrifying the danger he faced was. Su Qin's strength is far beyond that of the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang, but there is no guarantee that there is no existence in the depths of the endless ocean that is on par with or even surpasses Su Qin. Chapter 128. I still have to be cautious. Su Qin sat cross-legged, his mind fluctuating. Although he has countless trump cards, including the Buddha's palm, the most powerful divine art of Buddhism, it's better not to use them. If one day Su Qin is really forced to use the Buddha's palm, it means that there is no way out. In the end, I'm still not strong enough. If I enter the 9th heaven of Arhat, or transcend Arhat, who in the world can threaten me? Su Qin made a decision in his heart. From now on, I have to refine the divine sense in the pendant as soon as possible and transform it into my own strength. Su Qin picked up the jade pendant and merged his divine sense into it, slowly refining the huge divine sense inside. Refining divine sense is different from swallowing pills. Even if the original owner of the divine sense dies, it is still something else. If Su Qin wants to absorb it without any side effects, he needs to refine it bit by bit. Su Qin once again returned to his previous life. However, compared to before, Su Qin spent all his time refining the divine sense in the jade pendant except for signing in. At most 2 months, I can almost finish refining it. Su Qin judged in his heart. 2 months in exchange for a 5% to 10% increase in divine sense is definitely worth it. And just as Su Qin was slowly refining the divine sense in the jade pendant. "Third uncle, we're here." Outside the right spring square, a young voice came. Su Qin looked up and saw the two children of the Emperor of Tang, Li Yuan and Li Yuan, standing outside. Beside Li Yuan and Li Yuan, a personal eunuch and a palace maid were standing with their backs bowed. It was obvious that they were the ones who had brought the two of them here. "Why you here?" Su Qin walked out of the right spring square and asked casually. "Third uncle, it's too boring in the palace," Li Yuan said in a clear voice. Why aren't you saying anything?" Li Yuan turned around and looked at Li Yuan, who was hiding behind her. He dragged him in front of Su Qin and said, "Third uncle, father asked us to visit you often." "Third uncle?" Li Yuan braced himself and said. For some reason, Li Yuan, who had always been fearless and dared to pull on the Grand Tutor's beard, felt fear in his heart when he saw Su Qin. "The Emperor of Tang." Su Qin shook his head slightly. Although he had directly rejected the Emperor of Tang's proposal and didn't want to have too much to do with Li Yuan and Li Yuan, it was clear that the Emperor of Tang still wanted his children to be closer to Su Qin. "Third uncle, I always feel that your place is so comfortable, more comfortable than any other place in the palace," Li Yuan blinked and said. "Really?" Su Qin didn't feel the slightest bit strange. Li Yuan was a martial arts genius. His innate meridians were clear, and he could faintly feel the fluctuations of heaven and earth essence qi. Su Qin's residence, the right spring square, had countless heaven and earth arrays. Although these heaven and earth arrays didn't have the effect of gathering heaven and earth essence qi, they could still attract some essence qi. That was why Li Yuan felt a little different. "Do you like martial arts?" Su Qin glanced at Li Yuan and asked casually. "Martial arts? Are you talking about those eunuchs flying around?" Li Yuan's eyes lit up and he immediately said, "Of course one likes it. If you like it, you can tell your father that you want to practice martial arts." Su Qin looked at Li Yuan and said lightly, "With Li Yuan's martial arts talent, it would be a pity if he didn't practice martial arts." However, Su Qin didn't intend to teach Li Yuan martial arts personally. There were so many martial artists in the palace, and there were even dozens of grade 1 great grandmasters. Su Qin didn't need to do anything. After a while, Li Yuan and Li Yuan were taken back by the eunuchs and maids. After Li Yuan and Li Yuan left, Su Qin's heart suddenly moved, and he looked up in a certain direction. "The brand is about to dissipate. When I finish refining the divine sense, I will take some time to go to Nanzhao." Su Qin's eyes were calm, and he thought silently in his heart. A few years ago, the people of Nanzhao's moon worship tried to control Su Sungho with witchcraft. At that time, when Su Qin found out, he directly killed the person who released the witchcraft and split a sword light to form a brand on another person, so as to lock his position. Finally, he obediently led the way for Su Qin. Now that a few years have passed, the other party has returned to Nanzhao's moon worship early, and Su Qin should also go there. Since the moon worship dared to reach out to his family Su, they should be prepared to be exterminated. In the past few years, I have seen from many ancient books collected in the imperial palace that the moon god of the moon worship seems to be a bit strange. Su Qin touched his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. However, although Su Qin was curious in this regard, he was not too worried. The moon god of the moon worship is not simple, but it is impossible for him to reach the level of a legend. Otherwise, moon worship would have already shocked the world. Why would they stay in this small corner of Nanzhao? No matter what it is, I will know when I go and take a look. Thinking of this, Su Qin began to slowly refine the huge divine sense in the jade pendant again. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Su Qin slowly opened his eyes, and a trace of inexplicable aura appeared and disappeared in an instant. In front of Su Qin, cracks began to appear on the surface of the crystal-clear jade pendant. After these cracks appeared, they quickly spread and split, covering the entire jade pendant in the blink of an eye. Crack! The jade pendant suddenly turned into powder. This jade pendant originally existed to carry the huge divine sense of the great ancestor of the Empire of Tang. Now that the divine sense has disappeared, the jade pendant will naturally disappear. It's about time. Su Qin got up and walked out of the right spring square. Su Qin did not intend to tell anyone about his trip to Nanzhao. With his speed, it would take at most a year to travel from Nanzhao to Chang, or even half a day if everything went well. There was no need to tell anyone about such a short time. However, before leaving, Su Qin returned to the family Su and separated a few strands of divine sense to attach to the family Su. When Su Qin was in Chang, his divine sense enveloped the entire city at all times, so the family Su was absolutely safe. But now Su Qin was leaving Chang and going to Nanzhao. Even if the time was short, it was impossible not to make any preparations. With Su Qin's current strength, even if it was just a strand of divine sense, it was enough to suppress the world. Even if a martial arts legend were to attack, it would be able to delay for a while, enough for him to rush back. As for the Emperor of Tang, Li Sheng, and Su Yuan, Su Qin also separated a strand of divine sense to them. Although Su Yuan had the jade pendant that Su Qin gave her, it also contained a strand of divine sense. But after all, the divine sense in that jade pendant was divided by Su Qin before he entered the martial arts legend realm. It was far less useful than the current divine sense. I'll leave a sign in opportunity. Maybe I can use it at moon worship. Su Qin chose to leave the sign in opportunity of that day. If he could sign in at moon worship, Su Qin would sign in at moon worship. If not, Su Qin could still rush back to the palace before tomorrow. Time passed. Just before dawn, Su Qin walked out of the palace. Chapter 129. Nanzhao was located in the southwest of the Tang dynasty and was tens of thousands of miles away from Chang'an City. For ordinary people, it may take 10 years or even decades to cover such a long distance or even a lifetime. But in Su Qin's eyes, it was only a matter of hours. And this was under the premise that Su Qin was traveling slowly. Otherwise, if he went all out with the speed of Venerable Arhat, it would take him at most 2 hours. Although Nanzhao was one of the countries, it was far inferior to the Empire of Tang in terms of national strength. Moreover, most of the areas in the territory were undeveloped, and the atmosphere was desolate, and the people were tough. In Nanzhao, moon worship was supreme. Even the Emperor of Nanzhao was a disciple of moon worship and performed the etiquette of a father to the moon worshippers. At the same time, outside the 100,000 mountains of Nanzhao, Su Qin stood there quietly, looking into the depths of the 100,000 mountains. There it is. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated as he silently thought in his heart. According to the location he had locked onto, the sword light mark he planted stopped in the depths of the 100,000 mountains. Thinking of this, Su Qin took a step and disappeared. When he reached the depths of the 100,000 mountains and was more than 20 miles away from the mark he had locked onto, Su Qin slowed down and walked step by step. The reason why Su Qin did this was that he wanted to confirm if there was a place nearby that matched the system's sign in, and also to check the various auras of the 100,000 mountains with the Eye of Truth. Although Su Qin didn't think that moon worship was a threat to him, it was always better to be cautious. Just as Su Qin walked along the mountain road unhurriedly, on another mountain road not far away, 5 or 6 figures suddenly walked out. Of these 5 to 6 figures, other than the leader who was a middle-aged man, the rest were all teenagers. At this moment, these young men and women were looking around curiously. Su Qin was not surprised. He had already noticed the presence of this group of people, but the other party did not think so, especially the middle-aged man. When he saw Su Qin, his expression changed slightly. "Are you also going to moon worship?" The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before asking cautiously. "Yes," Su Qin said casually as he walked. Other than the middle-aged man who had some inner strength and could barely be considered a martial artist, the rest of the young men and women were just ordinary people. "That's good. We're on the way." The middle-aged man heaved a sigh of relief and said in a friendly manner, "I'm a warrior from the nearby Qingyang town. These are the disciples that our town sent to moon worship this year." The middle-aged man blurted out everything he knew without hesitation. The middle-aged man's name was Hong Fei, and he was from Qingyang town outside the 100,000 mountains. According to him, The reason he entered the 100,000 mountains this time was to send disciples to moon worship. Moon worship was the national religion of Nanzhao, and its status was even higher than that of the king. Therefore, every year, a large number of Nanzhao citizens would send their children to moon worship. Once selected by moon worship and entered the saint sect, they would definitely soar to the sky. This was the purpose of the middle-aged man this time. He brought all the eligible young men and women in his town and sent them to moon worship. As long as one of them was selected, the impact on Qingyang town would be unprecedented. You must be a martial artist who wants to visit the saint sect, right? The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, glanced at Su Qin and asked tentatively. Su Qin's aura was restrained, and there was no difference between him and an ordinary person. But if he was an ordinary person, how would he dare to come to the 100,000 mountains? Therefore, in the eyes of the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, Su Qin must be a powerful martial artist. In fact, it was not rare for martial artists like Su Qin to appear in the 100,000 mountains. There were many of them every year, and their purpose was to visit the saint sect. Su Qin heard him and did not bother to answer. Seeing this, the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, became more and more convinced of his judgment. Su Qin must have a request for moon worship, so he came to the 100,000 mountains specifically to visit the saint sect. However, Su Qin did not speak, and the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, did not dare to continue talking. He led the young men and women behind him and followed Su Qin. Let me tell you, when you enter the saint sect later, don't look around. If you disturb any of the saints, it will be a disaster for our Qingyang town, the middle-aged man warned the young men and women. Uncle Hong, is moon worship that good? At this moment, a young man with a strong head could not help but ask. It's more than good. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, shook his head and said, a few years ago, a disciple of moon worship wanted to go to the capital. In the end, before the disciple arrived, the king and many ministers were already waiting outside the capital to welcome him. Tell me, is it good or not? When the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, said this, the young man who asked the question immediately shrunk his head and did not dare to say another word. The other young men and women were also shocked. For them, the highest status person they had ever seen was the mayor of the town. As for the king of Nanzhao, he was a legendary figure. But now, it seemed that the so-called king of Nanzhao was nothing in front of the saint sect. Then what should we do? A beautiful young woman asked timidly. Do whatever the saint sect asks you to do. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, said seriously, remember, don't have any ulterior motives. Got it. I'll remember it too. The young men and women quickly agreed. Consider yourself lucky. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, suddenly thought of something and smiled. Recently, the saint sect has been worshipping the moon god, so the requirements for disciples have been relaxed. Otherwise, you won't even be able to enter the saint sect, let alone become a disciple. When the middle-aged man, Hong Fei, said this, his face was full of emotions. Worshipping the moon god? Su Qin, who was walking at a steady pace in front, was slightly moved. Before he came, he had read from the ancient books that moon worship would worship the moon god once every 10 years. Worshipping the moon god is the most solemn day of moon worship. On this day, all disciples will return to the saint sect. It's a good time to settle it once and for all, so that there won't be any revenge in the future. Su Qin thought silently in his heart. 4 hours later, after a long mountain road, Su Qin finally arrived outside the moon worship. At this time, Su Qin was at the top of a mountain, and in front of him was an iron chain that spanned across 2 mountains. As for the moon worship, it was located on the other side of the iron chain, a full 10 miles away. We're here. That's the moon worship. The middle-aged man, Hong Fei, let out a sigh of relief and pointed to the other side of the iron chain. What a spectacular sight! The young men and women opened their eyes wide and muttered to themselves. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation, audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.